Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of this Tech Talks. And today we thought let's do something different, right? And one of the projects which actually caught my attention during GitHub Universe was Home Assistant. So I reached out to Frank and said, "Hey, Frank, can you give us 45 minutes?" And then, of course, then I sent him a question which will take 2 hours to discuss. So probably we'll not do everything. We'll not talk about all the questions which I had in my mind, but we are happy to have Frank talking about Home Assistant with us today. Hey, Frank, thanks for joining. How are you?
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm doing great. How are you guys?
It's mid of the week, right? So of course you cannot say I'm done. Still have to work.
Yeah.
And then we also have our new co-host, Angela, joining us. So welcome to the show, Angela. And how are you?
Thank you so much for having me here. I'm good. How are you?
Doing great. And nice to have another co-host. Generally, it's like it feels lonely, right? So only one person asking
I
questions. So
understand that.
yeah. So thanks again. Okay, so let's go ahead and start with Home Assistant, right? But before we go and talk about Home Assistant, we would like to hear from you, Frank, what you do and like a small introduction about yourself.
I'm Franck Nijhof, better known on the internet as Frank, which is way easier to pronounce, I guess, internationally. And I'm the lead engineer of the Home Assistant project. And yeah, as of recent, just like you, Santosh, I became a GitHub star as well. So I guess we'll get into the Home Assistant part in a bit, right? I'm 42 years old, live in the Netherlands with my 2 kids, a boy and a girl of 7 and 11 years old, and my wife. And I live in a town called Enschede, which is in the middle of the Netherlands on the German border. And started with computers at the age of 6, Commodore 64. So maybe the classical programmer's nerd kind of background story from back in the day. Got into computers very early and stuck with it for all those years. Eventually became a software developer, a software architect for many companies. Slowly went into management positions there. And yeah, that's a little bit how my open source story started, which we'll probably get to in a bit. But I live by a motto, actually, which drives my open source, which is make a positive difference every single day. Be the change, especially in open source. You can do even little things to make a change happen, right? That's a little bit about me.
And what about you, Angela? So we'd like to have a smaller introduction of yourself as well. You're joining us for the first time.
All right, sure. So my name is Angela. I have been working as a full stack engineer for the last 11 years. My core expertise are both in front end as well as back end, but I keep coming back to Angular because of the strong, amazing community and amazing developer experience that Angular provides. I am 34. I have 3 kids. My kids are 7, 5, and 3 years old. And I am from Pakistan. I'm from Karachi, Pakistan. It's a very small town here in Pakistan. And yeah, that was a little bit about me.
Thank you. Great. So let's move over to Home Assistant. So we would love to hear from you, Frank, like how you started with Home Assistant, how you got involved with this project.
How I got into the Home Assistant project. So first of all, a little bit of introduction, maybe what Home Assistant is for people that are watching and have no idea. Home Assistant is a smart home automation system. You can basically connect all kinds of devices, lights, televisions, and whatnot together and do nice things with them, automate with them. For example, open up the door and turn on the lights. That's the very basic nutshell. And it's all open source. How I got in this project is actually not a classical story. Most of the people that get into home automation and Home Assistant often have smart lights and want to do more with them and then search for solutions and often end up with a Home Assistant as they search for more powerful things to do and making more exotic things happening in their homes. But for me, that wasn't the case. 7 years ago, my son was born and it was actually pretty silent in the house. The little girl was finally sleeping, the little boy was finally sleeping, and the missus was sleeping as well after labor, right? So it was silent in home and I was sitting on a couch and I actually was how do you say this politely? I was bored to death. I was absolutely bored as hell sitting on the couch with my laptop. I was in management at the time. I didn't code as much anymore as back in the day. So I did contribute to open source quite a bit already in different places. I was just browsing for something to contribute to, just browsing GitHub, see what cool stuff is there, what people are creating and doing. And I came across a project called Home Assistant. I had no idea. I had no smart lights. I had nothing of this stuff. I had no idea. But this project was interesting. There was a pull request open for a thermostat that I also had on my wall. And I was like, oh, that thing is actually like connectable through this. This is interesting. And I remember a pull requester, Paulus, was interacting. Paulus is the founder of Home Assistant. And I didn't agree with what he was saying there, which was the first good meet with Paulus, I guess. But it was interesting. There were some bug reports. I picked some up. I tried to build some add-ons, as they called it, in Home Assistant. Maybe we can get into that a little bit. But I built some things out. And what the interesting fact, what happened is that the community started to respond to that, which was really great. It was really welcoming. So I kept doing more and more. And over time, I became one of the maintainers and the lead engineer of Home Assistant. So that's how my story started 7 years ago, out of pure boredom and not necessarily the interest of a smart home, which is a little bit odd, but it brought me where I am today, and absolutely a smart home enthusiast nowadays.
So one question on Home Assistant, like if you can give us some background, like how this project was started and like how it has evolved over the years, like what changes you have seen? You said like you contributed to it like 7 years ago.
Yeah, I started contributing 7 years ago, but the project is older. The project is now 11 and a half years old at this point in time. And it was founded by Paulus Schoutsen. And Paulus, back in 2013, he actually bought a Philips Hue bridge, like a light bulb and bridge and things in his home. And he discovered that thing as an API. So he started talking with that, doing things like when the sun sets, like turn on the lights, but also interacting with his phone, like presence detection. Am I home? Am I coming home? And then turn on the lights automatically if it's evening, right? Things like that. And if I'm not at home, like turn them off. And that little script he started sharing on GitHub and other places. And it actually took off. People found that interesting. And from there, it expanded over all the years. Where 7 years ago, then I also jumped into that project. If I look at like how it grew over time, 2013 he started posting that. It grew fast after that. I think in 2017, one of the maintainers at the time, Pascal Felici, actually started building a Home Assistant operating system. So we actually have an operating system nowadays, which runs our whole ecosystem. And he created that. And at that point, it really took off because all of a sudden you had something you could just install on a Raspberry Pi. It would boot up and you would have an appliance that would just run in your home and you could automate your home with, which was really interesting. But there was one bottleneck still, which was that most of the Home Assistant was actually very tech savvy oriented. You had to know a lot about configuration. Everything had to be written down in YAML files manually, and you really had to build out your configuration in an editor and upload it and run Python environments and Python things in there. So what we started doing at that time is actually started moving things to the UI, enabling things in the user interface so everybody could use it. So if you bought a Philips Hue hub and you would plug it into your home, you could actually just in the interface say, hey, I have this hub, click and done, and it would connect. And that's where it really started flying, right? All of a sudden we had all the ingredients. We were an open source project, being able to connect with lots of appliances out there. You could just dump it onto a Raspberry Pi with single click upgrades. You could just focus on actually building out your smart home instead of trying to run an open source project, which was a huge difference. And from there on, the project just skyrocketed and we kept continuing. And as of last year, we're the most active open source project on GitHub, actually, with 21,000 active contributors over the last year, which is just, it's a bizarre, insane number. And our current estimates are around 1.5 million installations running Home Assistant out there, operating smart homes all around the world. And these numbers are just mind-blowing and makes me dizzy at times still. I cannot comprehend this still. But that's how it evolved over the years and where we are at now.
Great. I mean, I remember like I installed Home Assistant like 2 months back after coming from GitHub for sure. So I was like, oh, I have some home appliances. Why shouldn't I try this? And then it was easy. One of the easiest installation I have done. I just used like my WSL, Windows subsystem, WLS, what you call it, whatever. Windows subsystem for Linux, And then I just installed, there was image available, and then I just installed and everything started working. It was like really smooth.
Maybe you want to add something, right? Because we grow that fast. At some point, as an open source project, it became quite at such a point where you're not able to run it anymore ourselves, right? Maintenance burden became high. Like you have a lot of contributions. You need to manage that and project just running that on the side next to all of our normal daily jobs. It became quite a challenge. What's interesting is that 6 years ago, Paulus and Pascal actually founded Nabasa, which is as a commercial company, and a commercial company started offering Home Assistant cloud services, which are services that can be added to Home Assistant. You don't need it. If you don't want it, you can do everything yourself. But it provided services to be able to remote access your Home Assistant instance, connected to Alexa or Google very easily, things like that, to as a monthly fee. And with that fee, we actually are able to hire developers and people on the project to help manage all of these contributions, steer the project, and work on a project from a larger and higher perspective. So that went actually really well. This is how the project became sustainable and how I am personally also able to work full time on the Home Assistant project, which is very cool. Until last year, we actually went a step further and we founded Open Home Foundation, which is a foundation based in Switzerland, because in Switzerland we have the most strict laws regarding foundations. And Paulus actually donated Home Assistant and all of the sister and side projects into that foundation in such a way that it can never be pulled out and commercialized ever again. So besides us having a big open source project, finding a way to make it sustainable, we've also went in through the latest developments from last year. We put it into a foundation in such a way that it can be open source and free forever.
That's a great statement. I think more and more open source projects are going commercial. So this is one thing which will make sure like this never goes commercial. Otherwise, it will be like, as you said, like 1.5 million downloads. I mean, so many hobby developers who are just doing it just for fun. And if it goes commercial, it will be probably a bad face in the community, right? So yeah, good step.
We
so
need to
over to you,
protect it.
Angela. Yeah, exactly. What's your experience with Home Assistant? Have you tried this before?
I have never tried Home Assistant before and that's exactly what I was going to ask you as well, because living in Pakistan, we are very, very new, still very, very new to home automation and home assistance and all these kinds of things. We would love to have it because there are so many power outages. Sometimes the traffic becomes really, really interesting. So having something that allows me to turn my AC on while I'm going out from work to my home would be something extremely important for me. So can you tell me a little bit about what are the key technologies and the frameworks that you've used behind the Home Assistant?
So if we look at Home Assistant as the full stack thing we ship, right? It's a large stack, actually. On the root level, we actually have our own operating system. It's like you can fully install it on a Pi or on a virtual machine. And that operating system is built up based on buildroot, which is an open source. Basically, we build a firmware distribution, Linux firmware distribution using buildroot, which provides our bare minimal operating system. And if you look at that stack, it's essentially a bare bone Linux with some APIs in it and some things to make it running for our use cases and all the drivers we need, and some specific network configurations. But the most essential part there, it would be Docker, because Home Assistant stack is built on top of Docker from that point on. And to manage this stack, we have a piece of software that we've developed called the supervisor, which is an orchestration piece of software written in Python that also runs in the Docker container on that same system. So actually through that Docker container, it manages the operating system. So it handles the upgrades and the upgrades of itself. So then we have like the operating system and the orchestration container. The next step of our stack would be Home Assistant itself. The Home Assistant itself is the core application is written in Python. It runs also as a Docker container in that same stack. Which is the actual automation engine. It's the actual thing that automates the things, connects all and integrates all the devices into your home. That's the core thing that Home Assistant is. That's this Home Assistant stack. It's written in Python. If you look at the front end that's built on top of that, that would be TypeScript in combination with a lit. And we use the material design web components there for the UI, although we're looking for a replacement for that because in case you haven't noticed, Google has to put that one in the fridge, right? The project is now in maintenance mode. So we have to look into alternatives. We're looking at things like Shoelace or Web Awesome, which is currently in development maybe for as a replacement soon. But yeah, that's the front end stack. And then besides that, we have tons of little services things around it that are going on, like little API things, CLIs written in Go, tons of libraries in Python. We have Bash libraries even. There are so many moving parts to this, besides developer documentation, end user documentation, website, a community forum. And there's so many little bits of pieces. We're literally talking about hundreds of repos in different languages. But the main language we use a lot, which Home Assistant itself is written in, is Python.
Sounds like an interesting technology stack.
There's literally something for anyone who wants to code.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So one thing which I found really interesting when I was going through my installation, right? So I was like, okay, it integrates almost with all the devices which I had in my house. How is that possible?
I think we have 2,500, 3,000 integrations right now built into it. And those are not just devices, right? It's also like garbage collection services, weather services, Bitcoin wallets, you name it. You can integrate it with Home Assistant. We have 2,500-ish. Probably 3,000. I'm not even sure what the number is at this point. But integrations built in that connect to all of these. And if you look into the community, what they provide, because they can also provide their own integrations, the custom integrations, as we call them, they can distribute it themselves if they want to. There are thousands more there. So maybe we're looking at 5,000, 6,000 integrations in total of devices and services you can integrate in Home Assistant, which is just also nuts, to be honest. Like, you think of it, it can be integrated. We have support for toe warmers. Like, I don't know which smart home platform exists that supports like warming your toes, but Home Assistant does. So how do we all do this? Yeah, Home Assistant has been built from scratch to be extensible. Like, everything we plug and do in Home Assistant and build, we always think about how can we make this in such a way that other users can build on top of this and continue building on top of this. And it's actually that extensive that Home Assistant itself is a collection of integrations. So the automation engine inside Home Assistant itself is actually an integration. If you talk about the light switch in Home Assistant itself, it's actually also just an integration. So we use our own extension stack to build and extend Home Assistant that can also then be extended by any integration there. Yeah, and that's how we get such a wide range. Everybody can literally build anything they can think of, as long as you can code in Python a little bit. And honestly, I don't think it's that complex. And considering the amount of integrations out there, it turns out to be fairly doable. You integrate anything you can think of.
And then I saw there was an option, its integration is not provided. You can probably still connect to your devices. I think that was one option as well.
There are many integrations out there that are not built in and extend the capability of Home Assistant. And besides that, there are also like the standard protocols, right? We have Zigbee, which your Philips Hue bulbs, for example, are using, or the IKEA light bulbs, they are often used based on Zigbee, which is an open standard. There's also MQTT, which is used a lot in the DIY community to make devices communicate together. We support that. So if there's anything you have that support like one of those standard protocols, you can just hook them up through that. But even if that is not enough, like, there's also web scraping capabilities. So if you have a website and want to scrape off a specific like number or component from that website, a piece of text, whatever not, you could do that too. So there are always ways to implement things. And if it doesn't exist, there are ways to do it.
Can you tell me a little bit about how Home Assistant prioritizes privacy and security?
So the slogan of Home Assistant is an open source home automation platform that focuses on local control and privacy. Basically, local control and privacy first. That's the goal of Home Assistant. And the foundation we have, the goals of the foundation that owns Home Assistant, has sustainability in there, choice, and privacy. Those are the main pillars of the foundation as well. And we try to bring that everywhere. And how we do that is that Home Assistant is something you install in your home. You put it there, and everything runs on that device you install it on. If you install it on a Raspberry Pi, or maybe you buy one of the hardware devices we produce, that works too, it will run on that device, and everything happens on that device. The automation will take place on there if something happens in your home, but also if it records data about like if you're coming home or not, or where you are, or temperature sensors that are recorded over time, it will be recorded on there. That doesn't mean you cannot interact with the cloud, right? If you decide on hooking up some, I don't know, maybe you want to hook up YouTube to get data from it, or send data to a Grafana host you have running somewhere external. that's up to you. So the choice is there. We offer a choice to connect whatever you want and feel comfortable with. And if that choice is, I want to do only local stuff using Zigbee and basically pull the internet plug, you can do so. If you choose to push out data to somewhere, that's your choice and you decide to, but we don't. We will never send out the data anywhere by default. We don't.
So a follow-up question on the same topic, it's more about the open source, right? So let's say when open source developers are building so many integrations, it's possible that someone can probably do some harm, right? They may just plug in some backdoors. So how does Home Assistant as a project takes care of it?
So that's always possible. This is the hard part of open source, I would say, in general. We do many, many things. There are basically two separations to be made here. One is the separation is the stuff that we provide. So the integrations we ship and build into Home Assistant core, 2,500, 3,000 integrations, something like that. They are all reviewed and checked one by one constantly, every single PR. We have a large number of people reviewing those. We review the dependencies that are attached to those. So we dive into what is it used in and where is it coming from and what's the data doing. And we will definitely look for things that are happening there. Besides that, we do tons of security scanning and things like that. But we also actively review what is happening on there. So that's our side of the story. We try to prevent that, and we do. We have caught things in the past. So that's definitely good. And we thank God we've never had any occurrence that actually was the bad in that regard. But if you look at the community store, right, if you look at how people are distributing their own code and you can pull in that source code and you decide to run that and install that, that's code from somewhere else that's not checked by us, that's not reviewed, that you decide to run on your system. Yeah, that's hard. We cannot check that. We cannot do anything about it. It's basically you decide to download a piece of software and run it. And just like any piece of software you download from the internet, you have to understand what you're downloading and if you're feeling comfortable with it. The nice thing about it, though, is that Home Assistant is fully open source and everything you have there is also open source. So you can actually look at it and verify and look at yourself if something happens there. And if anybody tries, I'm pretty sure our community is on top of it too. I'm not worried about it in general. I haven't seen occurrences, but yeah, you'll never know. There will always be somebody that thinks he's the funny person on the internet eventually, right? I think that will happen at some point, someday, but we're doing all we can to always prevent that.
Thanks for answering that. One question I was always had in my mind, like when I heard about Home Assistant last year, like when it was mentioned that it gets like so many PRs in a year, like you had 21,000 contributors. Question is, how do you manage that? Like, I know, like you're doing full-time open source, right? I mean, even though you're being managed by a company or somehow managing the finances, but still, like being an open source developer, how do you manage those many PRs? And then, of course, there will be discussions, there will be community forums. Probably you will have your Discord channel or something.
So from a commercial company perspective, Nabasa, there's not much like control happening from that end. I think Nabasa mainly exists to provide some commercial services, of course, to fund the project. But people like me and many of us more, we're almost with 50 people right now, actually, full-time working on the open home idea, right? Like the Open Home Foundation has and all its values. We work on the open source projects in such a way that we try to steer it. We do a lot of reviews. I think a lot of maybe 50 or maybe even 80% of my time actually goes into just reviewing, steering, chatting with people, talking and discussing where things are going, but also talking to other contributors that are not like in the company, right? Like there are only 50 of us and not 21,000, right? So you talk to a lot of people. How the project is run is that we don't review this on our own. I would very much say that the community is also really much self-managing in that regard. We have a community manager that handles a lot of the communication in there. I, as a lead engineer, help a lot with like the architecture, where things are going. And the reviews itself are also a lot of contributors. Like we have 150 people that are helping out with reviewing. Like that's a lot of people. And you need an army to be able to do this. And the Home Assistant community as a whole is an army. And it's not just developers. It's people that are in Discord where like 80,000 people hang out. It's the community forums, which I don't know how many people, like 75,000 or something, that are hanging out there and discussing all day and asking questions. It's not just code, it's support, it's tinkering together, it's sharing ideas, it's solving problems in your home. It's building an integration for a specific product. Because if you look at that perspective, just from a product perspective, I don't have 3,000 different brands in my home of products to test PRs against, right? So people have to team up together in order to make things work together. And that happens a lot. And that's just very cool to see. The community is huge, handling issues, chatting, writing blogs, doing YouTube videos on everything we do and how to do things, and helping each other out, writing documentation, developer documentation, linting rules, security checks, you name it. Like, this is a huge operation that is not just code, it's a lot. And a lot of people help out with that.
With so many PRs that you were reviewing and so many contributions that are happening, can you tell me about if there are any standout projects or automations from the community that were really, really surprising to you?
There's so many. I don't even know where to start. Like, I've seen many applications of Home Assistant, the things they build and integrate. It's actually very surprising to just watch our subreddit actually and see what they all showcase. I always feel like our subreddit is basically the showcase piece of what people build with Home Assistant. But I've seen complete factories running on Home Assistant. Although it's not built for it, I've seen a brick factory where they actually bake and make bricks running on Home Assistant. We had him on as a guest on a live stream once, which was truly interesting. But people use it in so many different ways, maybe even to help out a family member that has disabilities and just help them out with automatically opening, closing curtains, because that's hard for them. Right. And nobody wants to see naked grandma in the evening, let's be honest. So the curtain should close automatically, maybe. But things like that, like, the interesting thing is more the creativity of the use cases that we didn't think of. We all think about home automation as turning on and off lights automatically. And that's how home automation usually starts for most people. But beyond that, like, it's your imagination and you can create it. We see automations for people that stand up from the couch and they've built pressure sensors into the couch. And if they stand up, pause automatically the thing they're watching on television, bright the light a little bit so they can see where they walk. And if they sit down again, they dim the lights and unpause what they were watching. Like, things like that, you can just build that and do that. And it's like really beyond whatever. It's really what you can think of. It's cool.
That sounds cool.
But you're a user, Santosh, right? What's the coolest thing you have in your home?
Beginner, so nothing. I'm just connecting all the devices I have, and that's it.
Basically controlling and viewing your whole house through a portal.
Exactly.
Right.
And yeah, I would like to explore more, but yeah, the problem is time, right? I mean, I think that's the problem.
It's a time-consuming rabbit hole. Yeah, definitely it is.
I hope I have that much time to do some stuff. Interesting. One question on automation thing, right? So you also have integration with GitHub Actions. If I'm not wrong, like that, there is an integration, right? So you can control your GitHub Actions via Home Assistant. Can you?
We have a GitHub integrations where you can track your repos and see the latest status of your builds and things like that. And you can automate on that if you like to, right? If you want to, like, blink a light or make an announcement in your home when you receive a new star in your GitHub repo, or when a build fails, maybe your lights can blink red, so you know, right? You can do that. Yes, definitely. GitHub is integratable, which was also showcased at GitHub Universe. Actually, on stage, we were at GitHub Universe 2024 in San Francisco, and we did the day 2 opening keynote, and they actually showcased Home Assistant and demoed Home Assistant live on stage, including some integrations into GitHub, which was really cool. Every time Home Assistant was started, a light would blink on stage. That was fun. That's definitely something to look back at if you are on YouTube. Check it out.
Yeah, but that was really interesting because you can also write your actions, GitHub Actions, inside the UI provided by Home Assistant, if I'm not wrong. And then you can trigger those actions, right?
I don't think you can. Or somebody should have built it. Maybe that's possible. I'm not aware of everything that's being built, to be honest. Like, there's so much out there in the community. I haven't seen this one. Could be there.
Probably. I mean, I think I remember seeing that, but yeah, maybe I'm not. It's been some time.
What would be your personal favorite feature in Home Assistant that you mostly use or rely the most on?
oh, wow. So the myth in general around probably me and what a lot of people think is, like, this guy, like, he writes all day on Home Assistant, right? He's busy with his project all day. He must have the most exotic and most special crazy automated home in the world. That is basically how most people see and think of this, right? And the truth is, I'm actually, this is so cool. I'm writing a blog by the time you hear this, or it probably is published, but I'm writing a blog called Confessions About My Smart Home. That's the title I set for last night. I think my own smart home, my house where I'm sitting in right now, where I work from home, may classify as one big real life experimental laboratory that is built for development and debugging. It's a place where I basically always am testing out stuff. I see a bug report, I see something new, I see something crazy somebody made. I try to play with things, right? It's the place where I try to reproduce bugs actually and try to break stuff like for real. The thing that runs in my home is, by the way, the development instance. I run the dev branch in my home, which I update every morning, which is actually maybe not the smartest thing to do, but I do. I'm also trying to mimic things in a way that when I write the release notes for the big releases each month, I want to paste in screenshots and how new features look. And that's even for things that I don't use or support or don't have devices for. So I would mock things out and try to make those screenshots work. And I actually use my actual home for that stuff. So yeah, when it comes to my smart home, I think it's best described as one big fake mess. I know if I click on the 3D printer on my dashboard, my coffee machine would turn on because that's how I used it at some point for a screenshot. And the truth is, nothing works here. It's always broken. And if something works for a few days, I probably break it after that. So yeah, my home is a big collection of a lot of different devices, and it's always broken. It's one big experiment. And I don't know, we all like to have a big smart home. We all like to have a beautiful, working, impressive home where friends come in and they're like, wow, this is like Back to the Future material or something. It's not that.
I mean, it's all worth it, yeah.
Yeah, and every Sunday I try to sit down like on a free day, like let's try and do it. And as soon as I start working on something and building out my own smart home and sit down to actually do it, I run into something and get an idea and start coding again and then contributing. I never get to actually automating my home in that regard. So honestly, if any of my family members is like listening and watching this back, I'm so sorry. You cannot like turn off the light of the TV at this moment because I broke it. But yeah, it's always like this. I'm so sorry. It's the worst. So my favorite feature would be messing with it. I love to mess with it. Let's sum it up as such.
I think we covered, or we just went through all the questions we had. And thanks for your time, Frank. But we generally ask our guests they want to promote anything on our channel. So apart from Home Assistant, if you have anything else, I mean, or related to Home Assistant, feel free to promote.
Well, I think I would like to say if you have smart home, interested in smart home, has smart home devices in your house, you're maybe using Apple HomeKit, the Google Home, or maybe Alexa in your home, give Home Assistant a shot. Take a look. It's a very interesting rabbit hole that has a little bit of a learning curve. But as most of the people joining this effort or trying this out, you will quickly learn how extremely creative and fun it can be. So just dive in, try it out, and follow our website at www.homeassistant.io, or check out my website, frank.dev. I sometimes write there too about my experience around the smart home, the things I see in the development world as well. So check us out, come by, say hi in the community, which is very open and welcoming.
So thanks again, Frank, for joining with us and sharing about Home Assistant. Thanks, Angela, for joining as a co-host for this episode. I'll probably see you again, probably on another episode. Probably we can have you as guest, Frank, again later in the year. If you have some time, maybe we can talk more the internals of Home Assistant, or maybe we can do live stream together. So,
that would be cool. Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, everyone, and see you on the next episode.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.